Then he crossed the clearing and held out his hand. "Dance with me." By the second song, his hand was at her waist, his eyes already on hers. There were 100 reasons not to lean closer. She ignored all of them.
Like and subscribe for more dark romance stories. Would you have danced with the alpha? Comment a fire emoji if you would. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this one.
The first man died with his hands up. Not fighting, not running, begging. "Please," he kept saying, stumbling backward through the trees with both palms out as though he could push death away if he acted frightened enough. "Please, I have children, please." No one answered him. The moon had not fully risen yet, and the forest was blue-black with evening. The pines pressed close together. Wet leaves clung to the hem of Alara's skirt, where she crouched behind a split cedar trunk, one hand over her mouth, the other wrapped so tightly around her bow that her fingers had gone numb. She had followed a rabbit farther than she should have. That was a mistake. A snapped twig, a flash of white tail, the thought of meat in her pot instead of another crust of stale bread. That was all it had taken. Now she was kneeling in cold earth, watching 3 village men circle a fourth in a clearing silvered by moonlight. She recognized 2 of them, Bren Holloway, whose wife sold apples at market, and Thomas Reed, who sang hymns too loudly on Sundays and stared too long at girls walking home alone. The third man, the one holding the knife, had his back to her. The one dying wore a butcher's apron streaked dark down the front. He had lost one shoe. His bound hands shook so badly the rope around his wrists rattled against itself. "I didn't mean to hear it," he said. "I swear it. I heard nothing clear, nothing that matters." The man with the knife tilted his head. "You heard enough." "No." His throat opened in one quick, terrible motion. The sound the butcher made did not sound human. It was wet and shocked and brief. He dropped to his knees, then to his side, twitching once in the leaves. Ilara bit down on the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. "Run," she told herself, "now." But horror rooted her in place. Her eyes clung to the body, to the pool creeping into the moss, to Bren's boots stepping neatly around it, as though he'd done this before. "Check him," Bren muttered. Thomas crouched beside the body, pressed 2 fingers to the butcher's neck, then nodded. Dead. The knife wielder wiped his blade on the dead man's apron. Then he turned just enough for moonlight to strike his face. Sheriff Vale. Ilara's stomach dropped. She shifted without meaning to. Her knee brushed a dry branch, hidden under leaves. Crack. 3 heads snapped toward the trees. "Someone's there!" Ilara ran. The forest exploded around her. Brambles tore at her skirt. Low branches slapped her face. Her braids snagged once and yanked her backward hard enough to make her cry out, but she tore free and kept going. Behind her came the thunder of boots and men shouting her name. She should have been afraid of tripping, afraid of the dark, afraid of wolves. Instead, she was only afraid of men. "Ilara!" Sheriff Vale shouted. "Stop and we can talk." Talk. She almost laughed. He had just slit a man's throat. She vaulted a log, slid down a bank slick with mud, splashed through a narrow stream, and nearly lost her bow. She caught it against her chest and ran harder. Her lungs burned. The woods blurred. Somewhere behind her, a lantern crashed and glass shattered. "You won't make it to the village," Bren yelled. "Good," she thought wildly. "I'm not trying to go back there." Then the forest changed. The sounds shifted first. The men's voices grew thin and uncertain. The air turned colder, sharper. heavy with the smell of pine sap and river stone and something else, something animal and ancient that made the hair at the nape of her neck rise. The old boundary. Everyone in town knew about it. No one marked it on maps, but they all knew where it was. The line where the pines grew denser. The line mothers told children never to cross. The line beyond which things with yellow eyes watched from the dark. Ilara crossed it without slowing. That was when the men behind her stopped shouting. The silence that followed was worse. She ran another 20 paces before she realized she could no longer hear boots behind her at all, only her own ragged breathing, only the wind moving through the pines, only a growl, low, close, vast. Ilara whirled, snatching an arrow from her quiver so fast she fumbled it. It fell. Her second arrow shook in her hands as she knocked it and drew. At first she saw nothing. Then 2 gold eyes opened in the dark. Not glowing, not unnatural, simply catching the moon. A wolf stepped between the trees. It was enormous. No hunting tale or drunk shepherd's exaggeration had prepared her for how large it was. Its shoulders came nearly to her chest. Its fur was black along the spine, silver at the throat, thick and dark as storm clouds in the moonlight. It moved without sound, not like an animal blundering through brush, like it belonged to the night in a way the trees did. Ilara's arms trembled. Another shape appeared to the left, then another. She was surrounded. The first wolf took 1 step closer, and she understood with a cold, awful certainty that if she loosed the arrow, it would do nothing. Nothing at all. She swallowed. "I don't have anything worth taking," she whispered because terror had made her foolish. The great wolf lowered its head. Behind her, far off now, came the sound of men retreating. Sheriff Vale shouting for the others to move, branches breaking in frantic retreat. The wolf's ears twitched toward the sound, then back to her. It knew. It knew exactly why she was here. Ilara's vision swam. She had not eaten since noon. She had run too far. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. The arrow slipped from nerveless fingers. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the black wolf lunging forward, not to kill her, to catch her as she fell. When Ilara woke, she thought for one confused moment that she was still dreaming. She lay on a pallet of furs inside a tent stitched from hide and heavy canvas. Firelight glowed gold through the seams. The air smelled of smoke, dried herbs, damp wool, and something richer underneath it all. Meat broth, old leather, animal heat. Her head pounded. She pushed herself upright too fast, and the world tipped. A woman sitting near the entrance looked up from a bowl she was mending. Her hair was shot through with silver, braided thick over one shoulder. A scar ran from the corner of her mouth to her jaw. "She's awake," the woman called. Voices answered outside. Too many. Ilara's hand flew to her throat. The necklace was still there. Relief hit so hard it made her dizzy. The silver chain was tucked beneath her dress, warm against her skin. She clutched it once before noticing something else. Her boots were gone. Her bow was not beside her, and the tent flap had been tied shut from the outside. Panic rose, swift and choking. "Where am I?" The woman's hands never stopped working. Alive, which is better than the alternative. I asked where. The woman glanced up then, eyes pale and assessing. "In the black fur camp." Ilara stared. The stories had 100 names for it. Wolf camp, shifter den, Devil's Hollow. No one in the village agreed on the truth of it because no one who wandered too close ever saw enough to say. "You're one of them," Ilara said. The woman snorted. That obvious, am I? The tent flap opened. Cold air swept in, carrying the smell of wood smoke and wet earth. 2 men ducked inside. One was broad and dark-bearded, with shoulders like an ox and a nose that had clearly been broken more than once. The other was younger, fair-haired, clean-cut in a way that made him look almost soft until Alara saw his eyes. Predator eyes, assessing, unblinking. He smiled. It made her skin crawl. Well, he said, the human has a face, after all. Alara shrank back. The older woman set aside her mending. Don't loom, Corin. You make yourself look uglier than you are. Cruel, the fair-haired man said lightly, though his gaze stayed fixed on Alara. The Alpha wants her. The older woman rose. Then he can wait while I make sure she can stand. He said, now. At that, even the woman went still. She turned back to Alara. Can you walk? Alara tried to swing her legs off the pallet. Her knees buckled the instant her feet touched ground. The woman caught her elbow. Wonderful, she muttered, half dead and stubborn. My favorite kind. I can walk. You can fall with conviction. That's different. Still, they got her moving. Someone returned her boots, though not her bow. The older woman, who introduced herself only as Brita, wrapped a wool shawl around Alara's shoulders and marched her out into the camp like a prisoner being shown a gallows. Alara stopped dead. The camp spread through a crescent clearing ringed by towering pines, bigger and more permanent than anything she had imagined. She had expected a few rough tents and maybe a central fire. Instead, there were wooden cabins built low and sturdy against the weather, their roofs steep and dark with pine pitch. Tents stood between them in neat rows, hide and canvas patched and weathered, but well kept. Smoke curled from stone cook fires. Meat hung drying beneath slanted racks. Bundles of herbs were tied above doorways. A wide training circle had been stamped hard into the earth to one side, its edges marked with carved posts. Beyond that sat fenced pens for goats and 2 shaggy mountain ponies. Farther back, near the river line, she saw children's washing strung between birch trees and little wooden toys abandoned in the dirt. Children. Her breath caught. She had not imagined children, but there they were, 3 small figures peering from behind a rain barrel near the cook fires, a little girl with 1 dark braid, 2 boys, one no older than 6, the other perhaps 8. All of them stared at Alara with huge eyes. The youngest whimpered and ducked behind the older boy when Alara looked his way. The older boy pulled him farther back, chin raised protectively, as if she were the monster. Everywhere she looked, wolves looked back, some in full human shape, some not quite. A woman carrying firewood with eyes too gold and nails too long. A man skinning a rabbit whose ears sat just a shade too high on his head. An old grandfather dozing on a bench, his lower canines visible even with his mouth closed. Everyone had paused to watch her pass. Not openly hostile, worse. Wary. A murmur followed her. Human. She's smaller than I thought. Is that blood on her hem? Why does she smell like village smoke? Alara had spent enough years being looked at like an inconvenience to know when she was unwelcome. Rita gripped her elbow and kept her moving. Eyes forward. Where are you taking me? To him. That was all she said. They led her to the largest cabin at the center of camp. Its walls were built from thick, dark logs, stripped smooth and fitted tightly together. Wolf skulls were carved into the support posts. Not trophies, Alara realized on a second look, but guardians, their mouths open in silent warning. Fresh pine boughs hung beneath the eaves. The front steps had been swept clean despite the mud. 2 wolves stood guard at the entrance. Neither spoke. One opened the door. Heat hit Alara first, then the smell of cedar smoke and something warm and masculine she could not name. The cabin inside was unexpectedly beautiful. Not luxurious, but made with care. Thick woven rugs. A long table scarred by years of use. Shelves full of books. Bundles of drying herbs near the hearth. Maps pinned to one wall with bone pegs. Weapons along another. Bows, axes, long knives. A spear with a dark polished shaft. And standing near the fire, one hand resting on the mantel, was the black wolf from the forest. In human form, he looked less monstrous and far more dangerous. Tall, dark-haired, broad through the shoulders and chest. His face would have been striking even without the scar that cut from his left temple down across his cheekbone, pale against sun-browned skin. He wore no jewels, no marks of rank beyond the way the room arranged itself around him. Nothing soft in him, nothing careless. His eyes were the same gold as before. They settled on her, taking in every detail, the scrape on her cheek, the mud at her hem, her bare fear. "Leave us," he said. Corin opened his mouth as if to protest, then thought better of it. Brita squeezed Alara's shoulder once, surprisingly gentle, and followed the others out. The door shut. Silence. Alara drew herself up as best she could. Am I to be eaten or questioned? Something flickered in his expression. Not quite amusement, neither if you answer well. His voice was lower than she expected, rough-edged, not loud. A voice that did not need volume to be obeyed. What is your name? Ilara Voss. He held out a hand. At first she thought he meant to shake hers. Then he simply waited. After a second, understanding dawned. The demand was wordless but clear, trust, or at least compliance. Reluctantly, Alara put her hand in his. His palm closed around hers, warm and calloused. He bowed his head slightly, inhaling once at her wrist. She jerked back. What are you doing? Learning whether you lie. That is not a thing people can do. His eyes lifted to hers. We are not people. Her pulse jumped. He released her and stepped back. I am Garrick. The name suited him. Hard, old, solid as iron. Alara, he said again, as if testing the shape of it. You witnessed human men kill one of their own. It was not a question. She clenched her jaw. Yes. Why were you in the forest? Hunting. At dusk, beyond the village line? I was hungry. That at least seemed to land. His gaze sharpened, but not unkindly. Did they see your face? Yes. Did they call your name? She hesitated. Yes. Then you cannot go back. Anger flashed hot through her fear. You don't get to decide that. No? He took one step closer. The men you saw murder a villager chased you into my woods. They know you ran. They know you live. If they find you before you reach a magistrate, they will cut your throat and bury you in a ditch. If you reach a magistrate, they will claim you are hysterical or mad. If you somehow convince someone to listen, those men will still come for you, and they will bring others. His voice never rose. That made it worse. You are alive because my wolves found you first. Ilara swallowed hard. So this is mercy? Locking me in a tent? This is survival. For who? He looked at her for a long moment, and then, very calmly, for both of us. A knock sounded. Before Garrick answered, the door opened and Corin stepped halfway in. The council wants a decision. They have one. Corin's jaw tightened. You're keeping her? Garrick did not glance at him. For now. That is unwise. That was not a request. Corin's eyes flicked to Alara. In them she saw dislike, yes, but something else too. interest, calculation. He bowed just enough to avoid calling it insolence and withdrew. Garrick went back to the fire, bracing one forearm on the mantel. I have spared you. Some here will not like it. Do not mistake this place for kindness. Ilara laughed once, sharp and humorless. That would be difficult. He watched her. Then he said, There are rules. Of course there are. You do not leave the boundaries without permission. I wouldn't know where they are. You will. You do not enter the training ring. You do not touch a wolf while they are shifting. You do not go near the southern ridge after dark. You do not feed the pups scraps from your own plate. Why would I feed your children scraps? Because you were hungry once and they will look at you like they are starving. His eyes narrowed slightly. And because if one of them gets sick on your kindness, I will regret keeping you. Ilara stared at him. This was not what she had expected. She had expected threats, teeth, chains. Instead, she had been given rules. Household rules, absurdly enough, in a camp full of monsters. And what am I then? She asked quietly. A guest. He did not answer fast enough. Her throat tightened. A prisoner? Still silence. Then Garrick said, You will work while you are here. There it was. What kind of work? Whatever the camp needs. He did not have the decency to look ashamed. The first days were worse than hunger and not as clean as fear. They gave Ilara a pallet in a narrow tent near the outer ring of camp, close enough to the pines that she woke at night to wind sighing through the branches and wondered if something stood just beyond the canvas, listening. Her blanket was coarse, her pillow a rolled fur, and the cold seeped up through the ground no matter how tightly she curled. At dawn, Brita woke her by kicking the tent post. Up. Water doesn't haul itself. Ilara dressed in yesterday's clothes, fingers numb, and stumbled into mornings that smelled of wet ash and cook fire smoke. The camp woke earlier than any village she had known. Wolves moved through the dimness with quiet purpose, hunters returning before sunrise, women grinding herbs, men carrying split wood, children still soft with sleep tucked against older siblings' legs while porridge steamed in kettles. No one greeted her. Brada set a pair of sloshing buckets into her hands and pointed toward the river. 2 trips before first meal, then sweep the main walk, then scrub the council table, then see to the laundry. I am not your servant. Brita gave her a long look. No, but until the alpha decides what else to do with you, you are alive and eating our food. Best make yourself useful. The words stung because they sounded too much like things Ilara had heard before. At the girl's home, usefulness had been the only thing that kept hands off you some days. She carried the buckets. The camp did not make space for her. Wolves brushed past without apology, shoulders knocking hers hard enough to sting. Once a young man with a jagged scar on his lip deliberately stepped in front of her on the path, forcing her off it and into a patch of churned mud while his friends snickered. Watch it, human. Another muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Fragile little thing. Surprised she survived one night. Her hands tightened on the bucket handles until her knuckles burned. She said nothing. At first, the children were worse. The youngest ones hid when she passed. A little girl burst into tears when Ilara smiled at her over a wash basin. One of the boys hissed from behind her brother's back, tiny lip curled over baby sharp teeth, and Alara nearly laughed at the absurdity of being threatened by someone whose shirt still had a stitched rabbit on the hem. She did not laugh. She remembered too well what it was to be small and frightened among strangers, so she kept her eyes down, did her chores, spoke when spoken to, took her scraps at the edge of the fire and ate them quickly before anyone could decide she had been given too much. She learned the camp the way prey learns a trap. The cookhouse stood near the eastern fires, always warm, always smelling of onions and bone broth and roasting meat. The healer's den sat beneath a twisted cedar at the north edge, its door lintel hung with dried flowers and feathers to warn children away from things that could poison them. The bathing pools lay upriver where hot spring water spilled warm over flat stone. The training ring was busiest just after sunrise, filled with the thud of bodies hitting dirt and the barked commands of warriors sweating through drills. Garrick moved through all of it like a shadow people stepped aside for. He was everywhere and nowhere, at the training ring correcting stances, at the cook fire speaking quietly with Brita over stores for winter, by the goat pens helping a boy mend broken slats, in the council cabin at night with maps spread under lamplight, while arguments rose and fell around him. He was not softer than the others, Ilara noticed. If anything, he was harsher. He expected more, spoke less. His approval was rare enough that wolves straightened when they earned it. Yet she never saw him strike anyone, not even when others deserved it. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Cruel men were easy to understand. Garrick was not cruel. He had simply taken her life and fitted it into his camp, as if that were his right. On the fourth day, Mara found her by the wash lines. Mara was beautiful in the sharp, dangerous way a thorn bush could be beautiful if it were on fire. Red hair, green eyes, mouth too quick to smile at other people's pain. She walked with 3 other women who moved around her like lesser flames, around a bonfire. Mara stopped before Alara's tub of laundry and tipped her head. "That shirt belongs to my brother." Alara wrung water from the cloth in her hands. "Then I suppose he should stop bleedin' on it." The women behind Mara laughed. Mara's smile vanished. "Ilara," she said softly, "do you know why the little ones cry when you pass? Because they've never seen a human woman before. Because they smell death on you." One of the other women made a pleased noise at that. Alara dropped the shirt into the tub. "If you came to speak in riddles, do it elsewhere. I'm busy." Mara took one smooth step forward and shoved the wash tub with her boot. Water sloshed over the rim, soaking Alara's skirt. "You are alive because Garrick made a strange choice. Don't let that make you bold." Alara met her gaze. There were many ways to survive women like Mara. Submission, silence, pleading. Alara had done all 3 in other places and hated herself for each of them. This time she chose something else. "Then tell Garrick to kill me," she said. "Otherwise move." The silence after that was exquisite. Mara's nostrils flared. For one dangerous moment, Alara thought she would lunge. Instead, she smiled again, thin and bright and ugly. "Oh, Mara said, "you'll learn." She did. That week, someone dumped a bucket of kitchen scraps in front of Alara's tent just before dawn and told her to clean it before the pups tracked through it. The next day, her morning bread ration vanished from the shelf where Brita left it. The day after that, one of the older boys, never quite meeting her eyes, told her the washing needed doing at the far creek, not the river, and she carried 2 baskets half a mile before Brita found her and barked that the wrong stream would ruin all the soap. "Who told you that?" Brita demanded. Ilara looked down. "It doesn't matter." Brita's mouth flattened. "Here it does." But Ilara had lived too long among people who took revenge for being named. She only shook her head and went back to scrubbing. Brita looked at her a long moment, then said nothing. That night, there was almost no stew left when Ilara's turn came. She stood at the cook fire with an empty bowl while the last spoonful slid into a hunter's hands. "I didn't get any," she said. The cook, a tired man with flour on his sleeves and a scar across one eyebrow, did not look sorry. "Come earlier." "I was hauling wood." He shrugged. Hunger made her reckless. She waited until the cookhouse emptied, slipped inside through the back flap and stole a heel of bread and 2 slices of cold turnip. She hid in the shadow behind her tent and ate with both hands, chewing too fast, throat burning. When she looked up, Garrick was standing 3 paces away. Her whole body locked. He had no cloak on, though the night was cold. Moonlight silvered the scar along his face. He looked not angry, exactly, merely still. Ilara rose so fast she nearly choked. "I was going to ask in the morning," she lied. "No, you weren't." Heat rushed into her cheeks. "Then punish me." He stared at the half-eaten bread in her hands. "When did you last eat a full meal?" The question was so unexpected that she answered before she could stop herself. "Yesterday morning." His expression changed. Not much, just enough. He stepped closer and took the bread from her hand. For one awful second, she thought he meant to take even that. Instead, he turned and gestured once with his head. "Come." Ilara hesitated. "Is this the part where you put me on a leash?" His eyes cut to hers. "You talk too much for someone caught stealing." People always say that right before they're about to do something unpleasant. Something like exhaustion passed over his face. Then he walked away, clearly expecting her to follow. Against every better instinct she had, she did. He took her not to the council cabin, not to the fire, but to his own house. Inside, the hearth still glowed. On the long table sat a covered pot, a loaf, and a small wedge of white cheese. Garrick uncovered the pot. Steam rose. "Sit." "I'd rather stand." "Sit, Ilara." She sat. He ladled stew into a bowl, tore off half the loaf, and set both in front of her. Not ceremoniously, not like a gift. Like it irritated him that such a thing had become necessary. She stared. "What?" "Why are you giving me your food?" He leaned one hand on the back of a chair across from her. "Because a starving creature steals. A fed one thinks." "So this is practical?" "Yes." It should have stung. Instead, to her horror, her eyes filled. She bent over the bowl before he could see and ate too fast. The stew was venison and onion and herbs she did not know, rich enough to make her lightheaded. She tore through the bread, then slowed only when she realized Garrick had not sat to eat himself. He was watching her. "Did you know," she asked quietly, "that you were being shorted food?" She nodded. "Yes." The shame of that hit harder than the hunger ever had. "And you let it happen. For 6 days." Only 6 days, his tone implied, as if she should be impressed. Anger flared. How generous. Garrick braced both hands on the chair. "I needed to know what my camp would do when given a powerless thing to hold beneath them." His voice had gone colder. "I know now." Ilara stared at him. "You used me." I learned from what was done to you. That is not better. No, he said, and for the first time there was something rough in his face that looked suspiciously like regret. It isn't. They looked at each other across the table while the fire cracked behind him. Then Garrick said, "Eat. Tomorrow changes." It did. The next morning, the whole camp was called to the central fire. Alara arrived late because Brita had sent her to fetch water before dawn. Her arms already ached by the time she came into the clearing, with the buckets hanging from their yoke, and found nearly every wolf gathered there. Children clung to older siblings' legs. Hunters stood with arms folded. Mara stood near the front, chin high. Corin leaned against a post, unreadable. Garrick stood on the low step outside the council cabin. He did not wait for silence. He had it the moment he raised his head. "Alara Voss remains under my protection," he said. Murmurs moved through the crowd. He kept going. "She works because all who eat here work, not because she is lesser. Any wolf who withholds food from her, lays a hand on her, or uses her place here to indulge their own cruelty will answer to me." His gaze moved through the gathered wolves like a blade. "Have I made myself clear?" No one answered at first. Then, slowly, heads dipped. "Yes, Alpha." Mara's came last. Ilara stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, the wooden yoke cutting across her shoulders, water dripping cold over her skirts. Garrick's eyes found hers only once. Then he stepped back and the gathering broke. No cheers, no sudden warmth. But the air had changed. Brita came to relieve her of the water buckets without complaint. The cook pressed an extra half ladle of porridge into her bowl that morning and pretended not to notice. A boy Alara had never spoken to before moved aside on the path instead of shoulder-checking her into the mud. Mara did not look at her. Corin did. Too long. Too thoughtfully. By the end of the week, the cruelties had not vanished, but they had retreated underground where open meanness could pretend to be accidents. No one stole her bread. No one shoved her. But cold shoulders remained. Conversation stopped when she approached. Some wolves still refused to take anything from her hands. Brita, at least, stopped calling her human, as if it were an insult. By the second week, Ilara knew which cabins held quarrelsome couples, which pups sleepwalked, which old women tucked dried mint under their pillows to help with dreams. She knew the river path well enough to walk it in darkness and the sound each tent flap made in the wind. And against all reason, a few people began speaking to her. Not many. Enough. The first was Junie, a girl of perhaps 14 who worked in the cookhouse and had a gap between her front teeth that gave every grin a lopsided charm. Junie never seemed to fear anything except Brita's disapproval. "You fold blankets wrong," she informed Alara on a rainy afternoon while they worked side by side in the laundry tent. "There's a wrong way to fold a blanket?" "There's Brita's way, and then there's bad ways." Alara snorted. Junie's eyes widened. "You do know how to laugh. Very rarely, usually only at other people's suffering." Junie's grin flashed. "Then you'll fit in here after all." After that, she talked constantly about who was secretly courting whom, which hunter cheated at dice, how Mara pretended not to care that her younger brother had joined the river patrol but cried into the goat's mane about it when she thought no one saw. Much of it was probably gossip, but Alara found herself waiting for Junie's chatter, the way one waits for sun after too many gray mornings. The second was not a friend so much as a slow surrender of fear. His name was Pip. He was the little boy who had whimpered at the sight of her that first morning, all solemn dark eyes and a stubborn lower lip. He belonged to no one now, Ilara gathered. His mother had died in winter and his father on a hunt months later. He drifted between older cousins, aunties, and whoever had a spare hand to scrub his ears. He began following her at a distance, not close enough to speak, just near enough to watch. He trailed her to the wash lines, to the river, to the herb shed. The first time Ilara noticed him, he was squatting near the roots of an old birch while she peeled potatoes, staring as if trying to determine whether she had hidden claws somewhere in her sleeves. Finally, she said, "If you're going to haunt me, you could at least help." He blinked. She held out a small knife and a potato. He looked at the knife, then at her, then bolted. The next day he came back, so did the next. 3 days later, he sat beside her in silence and peeled his first potato into tiny, ragged moons, tongue poked out in concentration. He did not speak a word. When she handed him a second potato, he took it without flinching. A week after that, he held up a wooden toy wolf with one broken leg and asked, in a voice no louder than falling ash, "Can humans fix things?" Ilara took the toy carefully. Yes. He watched as she wrapped the leg with a thin strip of leather and tied it tight. When she gave it back, his whole face changed. Trust looked very young on him. After that, other cubs edged closer. Not because they trusted her, because Pip did. Children everywhere, Ilara had learned, borrowed courage from one another. The first little girl to speak to her was Nessa, 7 years old, round-cheeked, all wild black curls and skinned knees. She cornered Ilara by the herb shed and asked bluntly, "Is it true humans don't bite unless they're dying?" Ilara blinked. "Who told you that?" "Davin. Davin is an idiot." Nessa nodded gravely. "That's what Brita says." Ilara laughed then, really laughed, and Nessa looked delighted with herself for causing it. By the turning of the moon, cubs were trailing after her in little packs. Pip carried kindling for her with fierce pride. Nessa demanded stories, while Ilara hung washing. 2 brothers tried to teach her a clapping game that required far more coordination than seemed reasonable. When she mended a ripped doll dress for one of the girls, word spread with startling speed. And by evening, 3 more children had appeared outside our tent with broken things in their hands and hope in their eyes. It was the first time in years anyone had come to her for kindness instead of labor. She found she did not mind. Mara minded very much. "You encourage them," Mara said one afternoon, watching from the path as Ilara braided flowers into Nessa's hair. Nessa stuck out her tongue. Mara ignored her. "They're children," Ilara said without looking up. "They'll grow attached." "That sounds like a them problem." Mara smiled, but there was a crack in it now. "Careful. Wolves mourn their own. Outsiders are forgotten faster." Nessa pressed closer to Ilara's side. Ilara tied off the braid and finally met Mara's gaze. "Then I suppose I'll have to become difficult to forget." Mara's eyes flashed. But before she could answer, Garrick crossed the yard carrying split logs, and she moved on. The day Mara finally tried to beat her happened in the rain. It had been raining since dawn, the kind of steady, cold mountain rain that turned pathways to black muck and made every surface smell of wet bark. Brita had sent Ilara to clean one of the storage sheds where winter pelts were kept. She worked alone, hauling out moldy straw, sweeping corners, sorting old linen from ruined. By noon, her sleeves were soaked and her back ached. She was kneeling to scrub a spill of lamp oil from the floor when the shed door slammed open hard enough to rattle the latch. Mara stood there with two of her friends behind her. Rain dripped from her hair. Her mouth was already curved in that awful near smile Ilara had come to loathe. "You missed a spot," Mara said. Ilara looked down at the clean floor, then back up. "Tragic." Mara stepped inside and kicked over the bucket. Gray water flooded across the boards. One of the other women laughed. Ilara rose slowly. "That was fresh water." "Yes." "You dragged me across the yard for this?" Mara walked closer until they were nearly nose to nose. "No. I came because I am tired of watching you trot through camp as though you belong here. I work. You nest. I breathe. That seems to offend you too." Mara shoved her hard in the chest. Ilara hit the shelf behind her. Pelts slid. A basket of bone buttons spilled over the floor. "You smile at the cubs," Mara hissed. "You sit at our fire. You look at the alpha like you've forgotten what you are." Ilara's pulse kicked. She shoved back. It was not enough to move Mara far, but it startled her. The other women went very still. Mara's face changed. Not the theatrical anger she used in public, real fury, humiliation. She struck Ilara across the mouth. Ilara tasted blood. Then Mara grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her forward hard enough to tear a cry from her throat. "You little rat." The first blow landed against Ilara's ribs. The second never came. A hand closed around Mara's wrist. Not gentle, bone grinding. Mara gasped and released Ilara at once. Garrick stood in the doorway, rain running from his hair and jaw, his expression blank in a way that made the whole shed seem to shrink around him. For a second, no one moved. Then Mara said, breathless, "She struck me first." Garrick did not look at Ilara. "Did she?" Mara hesitated. That was answer enough. Garrick's voice dropped lower. "Leave. Alpha. Now." Even Mara blanched. She jerked her wrist free and backed out into the rain, her two shadows scrambling after her. Ilara stayed where she was, one hand against the shelf, chest heaving. Garrick stepped inside and shut the door. Rain hammered the roof overhead. Blood ran warm from the split in Ilara's lip. She wiped it with the back of her hand before he could offer, and hated that he noticed anyway. "She'll hate you more now," she said. "She already did. You didn't have to intervene." Garrick looked at her, really looked, taking in the bruise darkening along her jaw and the way she held one side of her ribs. "You say that as if I found you winning." A laugh broke out of her, half pain, half disbelief. Then, mortifyingly, tears burned behind her eyes. Not from the blow, from the relief. Garrick stepped closer, slower this time as one might approach an injured stray. His hand lifted, paused near her face, then dropped. "Brita needs to see that rib. I've had worse. I know." The simple certainty of it undid her more than kindness would have. She turned away quickly. "I hate this place," she whispered. For a long moment there was only rain. Then Garrick said, "I know that too." He took off his cloak and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. It was heavy and warm from his body. "I'm trying to make it less hateful." Ilara swallowed hard. "You could start by letting me leave." A shadow passed over his face. "That I can't do." She almost snapped back. Instead, she let him walk her through the rain to Brita's tent, with one steadying hand at her elbow and did not pull away. That night, for the first time, she understood two terrible truths at once. She did not belong in the wolf camp, and Garrick was becoming the reason she could bear it. It began with books. She had noticed them before, of course, the shelves in Garrick's cabin, stacks of them in corners, ledgers, old histories, weathered story collections, maps rolled into baskets by the hearth. No one she had ever worked for owned so many. Wealthy merchants had polished furniture and silver-framed portraits. Priests had sermons and ledgers. Garrick had books. One evening, Brita sent Alara to the cabin with clean linens while Garrick was away at council. She laid the folded blankets at the foot of his bed, shook out fresh towels, and turned to leave. Her gaze caught on a green leather spine with gold stamping. She stopped. Slowly, almost guiltily, she crossed to the shelf and touched it with 2 fingers. The leather was worn smooth. She pulled it free an inch, then slid it back, opened another instead. Pages thick as cream, black marks marching across them like tiny, elegant tracks. Treasure, if you knew how to unlock it. You stare at them every time. She startled so badly the book nearly fell. Garrick stood in the open doorway, one shoulder braced to the frame, watching her. Alara shoved the book back in place. I was dusting. No, you weren't. Heat flooded her face. I was thinking about dusting. That would be a first. She glared. He did not look sorry. Then, because there was no dignity left to salvage, she said, I like the way they look. Garrick stepped inside and shut the door behind him. But the single word sat between them. Alara folded her arms. But I can't read them. He said nothing. That made it worse. No one taught me, she snapped. I was busy not starving. Still nothing. She turned for the door, furious with herself. Garrick's voice stopped her. Alara. She halted. Sit down. I'm not one of your wolves. I'm aware. I have work. You finished it 10 minutes ago. She rounded on him. And if I say no... He moved past her, pulled out a chair at the table, and set the green leather book on the wood. Then you will continue haunting my shelves like a ghost. His tone was so dry that, to her horror, she almost smiled. Almost. Suspicion narrowed her eyes. What are you doing? Teaching you to read. She stared. Why? Sat huge and ugly behind her teeth, but she did not ask it. She was too afraid of the answer. Instead, she sat. At first it was miserable. Garrick's handwriting was surprisingly elegant, his patience more surprising still. He began not with the green leather book, but with scraps of parchment and a stick of charcoal, drawing letters one by one while Alara repeated their sounds. She hated how childish it felt, hated how often she mixed up shapes, hated the heat that crawled into her face every time Garrick had to correct her. This one, he said, tapping the page. B. This? D. He lifted a brow. Alara squinted. No, wait, that one's B. Garrick leaned back. You are guessing. I am reasoning. You are guessing with confidence. She glared at him. His mouth twitched. The first time she read a whole word aloud, they both looked at the page, like something alive had crawled out of it. Wolf. Only 4 letters, uneven and halting from her lips. But it was there. Something in Garrick's face changed. Again, he said quietly. She read it again, and again. By the 4th time, she was grinning too hard to manage the sounds properly. Garrick shook his head. You've become insufferable in under a minute. I always was. Now I'm educated." He laughed then, a real laugh, low and unexpected, and Alara forgot the word entirely because she had never heard that sound from him before. The lessons became theirs. Not every day. Garrick had duties. Ilara had work. But most evenings after the last meal, when the camp settled and the cubs were packed off to pallets, and the hunters drifted into their own circles, she would find herself in his cabin with charcoal-stained fingers and stubborn determination. She learned letters, then words, then sentences. At first, she read children's tales because Garrick said simple words built honest foundations. She pretended to hate them, and then, when he left the room, reread whole pages under her breath just for the thrill of understanding them. He caught her at it once and said nothing, only left 2 more slim storybooks on the shelf within her reach. She started noticing small things about him then. The way he listened with his whole attention when she read, as though each word mattered. The scar on his forearm she had never seen before, pale and crescent-shaped near the wrist. That he always removed his boots before stepping onto the rug by the hearth. That when he was tired, he rubbed the bridge of his nose between thumb and forefinger and stared at the fire as though willing it to solve council disputes for him. That he smelled of cedar, cold air, and the wild, clean scent of river water after a shift. One night, after she stumbled through a sentence 3 times in a row and slammed the book shut in frustration, Garrick said, "You growl snarl when angry." Alara blinked. "What?" "You make a sound. Here." He touched his own throat lightly, like a cub warning away larger teeth. "That is not a thing." "It is. You're mocking me." "A little." She snatched the charcoal and threw it at him. He caught it without looking. By the time the first leaves turned gold, Alara could read simple pages without help. The evening she managed a full story aloud from beginning to end, Junie dragged half the cook tent over to celebrate as if Alara had slain a stag. Pip clapped so hard he fell over backward. Nessa demanded to know if Alara could read her to sleep. Even Brita, pretending sternness, handed Alara a sweet bun from the back of the tray and said, "Don't let it go to your head." Mara, standing near the meat rack with her arms folded, watched it all with an expression Alara could not name. Not just hatred anymore, something more uneasy, as if Alara's place in camp had stopped being temporary in ways Mara had not noticed until it was too late. The day Garrick took her to the river, summer had settled warm and green over the valley. Alara had spent the morning helping Junie smoke fish and the afternoon sorting dried roots in the healer's den. By sunset, her skin felt tacky with sweat and herb dust. She was carrying a basket of empty jars back from Soren's hut when she heard Garrick's whistle from the ridge path. Not sharp, not commanding, just enough to catch her attention. He stood above her where the trail bent toward the river, shirt unlaced at the throat, sleeves rolled. The dying light turned the edges of him copper. "What?" she called. "Come with me." "That sounds suspicious." "It is." She should have refused on principle. Instead, she followed. The river north of camp was different from the one near the laundry paths. Wider, deeper. It curved between great flat stones and alder trees whose roots gripped the bank like hands. Steam drifted from one end where a hot spring fed into the current. The place smelled of clean water and sun-warmed rock. Garrick stripped off his boots. Alara stopped dead. "What are you doing?" "Getting in." "No." Yes. I said no because I can't swim. I know. That should concern you. He pulled his shirt over his head. Ilara forgot the next clever thing she meant to say. His body was all hard lines and old violence. Scars crossed him everywhere once you knew to look. Thin white lines over his ribs, a puckered mark near his shoulder, a jagged slash low on his side that must have hurt for months when fresh. His chest and arms were strong without softness, built by years of work and fighting and surviving winters that killed weaker things. He noticed her noticing. "You can stare, or you can come in," he said. Heat rushed into her face. "I was judging." "Poorly." He stepped into the water and turned. "I won't let you drown." That is exactly what a person planning a drowning would say. Garrick sighed. "You are exhausting." Still, he waited. Ilara set down the basket and tugged off her boots. She waded in one careful step at a time, hissing at the cold, until the spring-fed warmth reached her calves. The riverbed was slick underfoot. She made it 3 more steps before sliding on algae and pinwheeling wildly. Garrick caught her around the waist. Her hands flew to his shoulders. For a moment they were very close. Too close. The river moved around them in low silver currents. One of Garrick's hands spanned her side easily. She could feel the warmth of his skin even through wet linen. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then rose again. "Balance," he said, though his voice had gone rougher. Ilara cleared her throat. "You could have just said I was about to fall. You were obvious, and yet you didn't warn me. I was hoping you'd learn." She should have shoved him. Instead, she let him teach her. Floating terrified her at first. The surrender of it, trusting water to hold her, trusting her own body not to sink. Garrick's hand stayed under her back, steady as stone. When panic tightened her limbs, he said, "Breathe." When she splashed him in anger, he merely pushed her gently farther from the bank and made her kick harder to return. By the time the moon rose, Ilara could cross a calm stretch without swallowing half the river. She stood in waist-deep water, laughing breathlessly, hair plastered to her neck, while Garrick watched from a rock shelf with that rare, softened expression he wore only when she surprised him. "What?" she demanded. "You look proud of yourself." "I am. As well you should be." The quiet sincerity of it struck her harder than praise shouted ever had. Ilara looked away first. They sat afterward on the bank with their feet in the water, letting night dry the rest of them. Crickets sang in the grass. Somewhere upriver, an owl called. "This scar," Ilara said before she could second-guess herself, gesturing lightly toward the one on his face. "You never told me." Garrick was silent for so long she thought he would refuse. Then he said, "My old alpha gave it to me." Ilara turned. "I challenged him when I was 17. Not because I thought I'd win, because he had beaten a boy half to death for dropping a deer haunch in the mud." His mouth twisted. The boy was 8. The image hit Ilara hard. What happened? "I lasted longer than he expected." Garrick touched the scar with 2 fingers. "This was his last gift before I tore out his throat." The words should have chilled her. Instead, she said, "Good." His head turned. Ilara lifted one shoulder. He sounded terrible. He was. She looked at the river. "My father wasn't cruel." Garrick waited. She had never spoken to him at length about home, not really, bits, yes, names, hints, the bones of a story without the ache inside it. Now, beneath the moon and river steam, the rest came easier. He was a cooper. Not a rich one, not a strong one either, by the end. The sickness took him slow. Her hand went to the necklace at her throat. I never knew my mother. She died before I could remember anything. At least, that's what he told me. Garrick's gaze dropped to the chain. You've never taken that off. It's all I have of her. A gift. A necklace. My father gave it to me when he knew he was dying. Said it was hers. Told me to keep it safe. She touched the small silver locket beneath the cloth of her dress. I used to pretend if I held it tight enough, maybe I could remember her face. Do you? Ilara smiled sadly. No. The river moved around the stones. After a while, Garrick said, I do not remember my parents' faces either. She looked at him. I remember cold, a ditch, someone lifting me by the back of the shirt like an unwanted pup. His gaze stayed fixed on the water. That was my first memory. The old Alpha found you. He nodded. I thought he saved me. Garrick's mouth hardened. Children make gods out of anyone who feeds them. Ilara did not realize she had moved closer until their shoulders touched. This time, neither of them shifted away. By harvest, the camp had become something dangerous to her. Not safe. Never that. But, dear... Junie dragged Ilara to berrying trips and whispered scandal into her ear until they both nearly dropped baskets, laughing. Pip had stopped flinching when she hugged him, and now launched himself at her waist whenever he won a race in the yard as if she had appointed herself his victory witness. Nessa curled beside Ilara at firelight with her head in Ilara's lap and demanded the same 3 stories read aloud over and over until Brita threatened to braid both their mouths shut. Even wolves who had once avoided her now nodded in passing, asked after her bruised hand, handed her tools instead of dropping them at her feet. Small things. But small things, Ilara had learned, were what made a place livable. One evening, she caught 2 older hunters correcting a new adolescent boy when he called her the human. She has a name, one said. Ilara walked past without turning her head, but something warm and strange settled in her chest. Not belonging, not yet. Something near it. The harvest celebration came on the first clear night after 3 days of rain. Fires were lit all through the clearing. Venison roasted on spits. Junie smuggled cider before it had properly cooled and got scolded by 3 aunties and 1 delighted grandfather. Children ran until they dropped where they stood. Fiddles came out, drums. Someone produced a reed pipe so mournful that half the wolves started singing under their breath, without meaning to. Ilara stood at the edge of the central fire in a borrowed dark blue dress Junie had insisted brought out her eyes. You look like you've been carved from moonlight, Junie announced, then wrinkled her nose. No, that's awful. Ignore me. It is awful. You still look good. Ilara laughed and smoothed the skirt self-consciously. She had not worn anything made for dancing in years. The bodice fit close. The sleeves were soft. Junie had threaded tiny white flowers into her braid before Ilara could object. Across the fire, Garrick saw her. The look on his face made her forget the music for half a beat. Then he crossed to her. He was wearing dark clothes, too, cleaner than usual, his hair tied back from his face. The fire put gold into the scar along his cheek. Around them the pack spun and sang and stamped the earth in rhythm. Dance with me, he said. Ilara's heart misbehaved. I don't know how. You have feet. We'll begin there. That sounds insulting. It is. But his hand was already extended. When she took it, the warmth of his palm shot straight up her arm. The first dance was quick and full of steps she nearly ruined. Garrick steadied her without making it obvious. The second was slower. The ring around them widened. Drums softened. Fiddle took over. His hand came to rest at her waist. All around them, wolves turned with their mates, their siblings, their children. Firelight moved over faces Ilara had once only feared. Now those same people smiled when they passed. Junie nearly tripped over a stool, grinning at them. Brita, pretending to inspect a roast, watched from the fire with suspiciously satisfied eyes. Ilara looked up at Garrick. "You're staring." "So are you." His thumb shifted lightly against the fabric at her waist. There were 100 reasons not to lean closer. She ignored all of them. When he kissed her, the clearing seemed to drop away. Not the fierce, desperate kiss by the river that might have been imagined. Not a stolen brush of mouths. This was deeper, slower, something chosen in full view of the fire, the pack, the night itself. Garrick's hand tightened at her waist. Ilara rose on her toes and kissed him back like she had been waiting for permission and had finally stopped caring who granted it. The music changed around them. Someone whooped. Ilara broke away, breathless and flushed. Garrick's forehead touched hers for one brief moment. "Too much audience for your liking?" "Entirely too much," she whispered. His mouth curved. "Good." For 3 days afterward, she could not cross the camp without feeling eyes on her. Not cruel this time. Interested, amused, a little awed. The alpha had kissed the human girl before the whole pack. That was a language even cubs understood. Pip looked especially delighted, though he refused to explain why. Mara looked like she might choke. Corin began smiling more. That, Ilara would later realize, was the first warning. Corin chose his moment carefully. Garrick had gone south to inspect a broken trapping line and would not return until dusk. The camp had thinned around midday, hunters out and children napping in the warm lull after their meal. Ilara was behind the cookhouse sorting dried beans from pebbles when Corin came and crouched beside her without invitation. "You've made yourself comfortable," he said. Ilara kept sorting. "You've made yourself unwelcome." He laughed softly, still sharp. "What do you want?" Corin reached into the basket and plucked out a pebble, rolling it between long fingers. He was handsome in a polished way Garrick never was. Fair hair tied neatly. A face too symmetrical to trust. The kind of man who looked safe from across a room and dangerous only when he smiled too long. "I wanted to see if you truly cared for him," he said. Ilara's hand stilled. "Or if this is a game," she looked at him then. "You think I'd stay here for amusement? I think humans have always wanted what wolves build. I wanted to leave this place for weeks. And now?" His gaze dipped meaningfully toward the cabin at the camp center. Ilara stood. "Move." Corin rose too. Up close, the ease in him looked more like calculation. "You deserve gentleness," he said quietly. "Garrick does not know how to give it." Ilara's stomach tightened. "That is none of your concern. He'll always choose the pack first. As he should. And what are you to him? A novelty? A softness he indulges before winter takes you somewhere else?" Corin's voice turned warmer, not kinder. "You would be safer with someone who understands what you need." Ilara took a step back. Corin took one forward. "He is too hard for you," he murmured. "I said move." His hand closed around her wrist. Not hard at first, just certain. Ilara jerked. "Let go." I would never frighten you, he said. That was when fear truly arrived. Not because of his grip, because he thought this sounded convincing. Corin! Garrick's voice cracked across the yard like an axe blow. Corin released her instantly. Garrick stood 10 paces away, mud on his boots from the south path, his face gone still in the worst possible way. He had returned early, saw enough. The air around him felt charged, feral. Alara told you to let go, Garrick said. Corin lifted both hands. And I did, after you touched what is mine. The words hit Alara hard for different reasons than before. Not because of possession, because Garrick sounded barely human. Corin's smile thinned. Yours? The change in Garrick was terrifyingly fast. He crossed the yard in 2 strides and hit Corin hard enough to send them both through the bean baskets. Dry beans flew. Corin struck back. They crashed into a post, splintering it. Wolves shouted. Someone screamed for the cubs to get back. Ilara stumbled away as claws flashed where hands had been. Not full shift. Worse. The half-state. Human enough to hate, wolf enough to kill. Garrick slammed Corin to the dirt, and his claws closed at Corin's throat. Alpha! Brita shouted. Corin snarled and slashed upward, opening Garrick's shoulder. Blood sprayed. The camp erupted. Ilara had seen men fight. She had seen murder. This was something else. Older, wilder, more terrible. Garrick's face had changed, jaw too sharp, canines bared, eyes all gold. He looked down at Corin with murder clear in every line of him. Not rage alone, claim, punishment, finality. Ilara, Brita barked behind her. Don't. Too late, Ilara ran forward. Garrick. He did not move. Corin choked beneath his hand. Garrick. This time he looked at her. Just for a second, that was enough. She saw what he was in that moment. Not the man at the fire. Not the patient teacher bent over a child's book. Not the wolf who had caught her in the forest. An alpha built from teeth and old hurt, and the certainty that anything threatening his own should die. Fear went through her cold and clean. Garrick saw it. His claws loosened. Corin dragged in a ragged breath and rolled away, coughing blood. The gold in Garrick's eyes dimmed. Ilara, she stepped back. Then again. The entire clearing had gone silent. Garrick had nearly killed his second in front of them all. For her. She should have felt protected. Instead, she could not stop seeing the way he'd looked at Corin, as though a throat were just another fragile thing to break. Ilara, Garrick said again, and there was human grief in it now. She turned and fled before he could say more. For 3 days, she avoided him. She carried her chores farther from the central cabins, ate with Junie and the children near to cook fires instead of the main fire. Took her reading book, but not to Garrick's house. Slept badly. Jumped at shadows. Hated herself for both fear and longing. Because even frightened, she missed him. That was the worst of it. Junie noticed first. You're peeling apples like they insulted your mother, she said gently. Ilara kept cutting. Maybe they did. Junie hesitated. He looked terrible after. Ilara's knife stilled. I know, Junie said quickly. What he did was wrong. Corin could have died. He almost did. Yes, Junie swallowed. But Garrick has never looked at anyone the way he looked at you after. Like he'd cut off his own hand if it would undo it. Ilara set down the knife. That doesn't make it less frightening. No, Junie's voice softened. It just makes it sad. Brita said nothing at all, which somehow felt louder. She only pressed a jar of salve into Ilara's hand that evening and said, For your sleep. Rub it at your temples. The first gift arrived the next morning, a small bundle of blue wildflowers tied with plain string, left outside Alara's tent. No note. The second came that evening. A book. Not one from Garrick's shelves. A new one or nearly new, its pages thick and easy to turn. The script larger than the others because he knew she still tired on long passages. Alara held it to her chest and sat on her pallet for nearly an hour without opening it. On the third day came white flowers from the riverside. On the fourth, a polished pebble shaped like a heart that Pip announced solemnly Garrick had absolutely not told him to deliver. By the fifth day, Alara's anger had thinned into ache. She still had not spoken to him. Then, on the sixth night, she found the cake. It sat on a wooden plate outside her tent just after dusk, small and golden and dusted lightly with sugar. No one in camp ever wasted sugar. Not casually, not on a single serving. It smelled of honey and spice. Alara stared at it. Junie peeped from across the yard, failed spectacularly to act innocent, and vanished. Of course, Garrick, only Garrick, with Junie's help, would think to offer apology in the shape of sweetness instead of words. Alara's chest tightened painfully. She took the cake inside. The first bite made her close her eyes. Soft, warm, richer than anything she had tasted in years. Honey melting on her tongue, a little orange peel, some spice she couldn't name. She ate slowly at first, then faster, scraping every crumb from the plate with one finger. No one had ever given her a cake for no reason. No birthday, no feast day. Nothing in her old life had ever been so unnecessarily kind. By the time she finished, tears were slipping hot and quiet down her face. She laughed at herself and wiped them away. Enough. She would speak to Garrick. Not because the cake fixed anything. Not because fear vanished. Because love, she was beginning to suspect, was sometimes choosing to walk back toward what frightened you and ask it to be gentler. Alara rose, set aside the empty plate, and stepped out into the night. The main cabin glowed through the trees ahead. Halfway there, the world tilted. She stopped, blinking hard. The firelight smeared. Her stomach turned violently. At first she thought she had stood too fast, then her knees buckled. The ground rose up in a rush. She caught herself on one hand, tried to call out, and found her tongue heavy and useless in her mouth. No, 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 no. The path lurched sideways. She took one desperate step, then another. A stone caught her foot. She fell hard. Pain exploded at the side of her head. The stars went black. When Garrick found her, she was lying in the path not 20 yards from his cabin, blood in her hair, skin cold with sweat. He did not remember crossing the distance. One moment he was standing on the porch. The next, he was on his knees in the dirt with Alara in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. Alara. Nothing. Her pulse fluttered against his fingers like a trapped moth. Too fast, too weak. "Brita," he roared. The camp exploded into motion. By the time he carried Alara into the healer's den, Brita had blankets stripped back, and Soren was shoving children and gawking adults out the door with a language unfit for any sainted memory. Garrick laid Alara on the narrow bed, and only then saw the plate Junie had picked up from the path outside her tent. Cake crumbs. Soren bent over her, pried open one eyelid, cursed, and shoved Garrick out of the way. Her pupils are wrong. What did she take? Nothing. Soren sniffed her breath, pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, then turned grim. Not nothing. Garrick's whole body went cold. What? The old healer looked up. Poison. The word landed like an axe blow. Brita made a strangled sound behind him. Junie started crying outright. Garrick gripped the bedpost so hard the wood cracked under his hand. Fix it. If I could pluck antidotes from the rafters, I would have by now, Soren snapped. I need to know what was used. Tell me what you need. The healer hesitated only a heartbeat. Moonthorn, if it's what I think, fresh, not dried. It grows east of here in the old abandoned gardens beyond the human fields. Human land. A trap, Garrick thought immediately. He did not care. Keep her alive, he said. Soren's lined face hardened. I'll try. No. Garrick stepped close enough that anyone else would have flinched. Do more than try. Soren did not flinch. Then bring me what I need. Garrick turned and was already halfway to the door when Brita caught his sleeve. Garrick, think. I am. This is too clean, too convenient. His gaze cut to hers. Brita's voice dropped. Who knew Junie helped bake that cake? Junie's sobs hitched into horrified silence. Garrick understood at once. Not many. Very few. His mind did not want to put the pieces together in the shape they formed. Keep the camp closed, he said. No one leaves, no one enters. If Corin is not in sight by the time I return, chain the gate. Then he shifted and ran. The humans were waiting. Of course they were. They caught him at the stone bridge where forest gave way to pasture, and pasture gave way to the first of the abandoned orchard walls. Silver nets dropped from the trees. Arrows hissed from the dark. Garrick tore through the first line, snapping one man's arm and hurling another into the stream. But silver chains followed, and silver burned deeper than iron ever could. He went down on one knee. A club cracked across the back of his skull. The world flashed white. When his vision cleared, Sheriff Vale stood over him with a torch in one hand and triumph in his eyes. About time, the sheriff said. Garrick strained against the silver biting into his wrists. Then another scent reached him. Wolf. Corin stepped from behind the sheriff's men. Human-shaped, unmarked except for the healing claw scars beneath his collar. Betrayal had a smell, too. Salt and rot, and the satisfaction of a coward who finally thinks himself brave. Garrick stared at him. Corin's mouth curved. You should have killed the girl when you found her. Garrick lunged despite the chains. The men hauled him back, silver searing into flesh. You poisoned her, Garrick said. Corin gave a minute shrug. I removed a problem. She trusted you. No. Corin's expression chilled. She trusted you. That was the problem. They dragged Garrick to the village square by dawn. The same square where Alara had once bought apples with careful coins, where children played at midsummer, where the butcher's wife would soon learn why her husband had never come home. Humans gathered in a ring as they strung him up to a thick timber beam with silver hooked through rope. Some stared in fascination, some with hatred, some with righteous excitement that made them uglier than open monsters ever could. Row upon row of narrow human faces, afraid of wolves, crueler than wolves. Sheriff Vale climbed the platform and announced in a ringing voice that the beast responsible for livestock deaths, child disappearances, and every lost traveler in 10 years had finally been taken. The villagers cheered. Corin watched from the edge of the square like a man attending a play he had funded himself. Garrick spat blood at the sheriff's boots. Vale smiled. Still breathing? Don't worry, we'll correct that. In the healer's den, Ilara hovered between worlds. At first there was only fever and fragments. her father coughing in candlelight, Brida's rough hand on her shoulder, Garrick's voice somewhere far away saying her name like a vow. Then, slowly, something bitter and cool slid down her throat. A hand held her jaw. Another lifted her head. Her body fought the liquid. Someone swore and forced more between her lips. She dreamed of a white flower unfolding in darkness. When she woke, true waking, dawn light was pale against the hide walls, and Soren was sitting beside her with his elbows on his knees, looking 10 years older than he had the night before. Alara blinked. Everything hurt. "Don't move fast," Soren said. "Your head met a stone with more devotion than sense." Her tongue felt thick. "Garrick." Soren's expression shifted. Cold flooded her. "Where is he?" The healer held up a hand. "Alive when last I knew, but gone." "Gone where?" He looked down at the thing in his palm. Her necklace. The silver locket hung open. Inside, the pressed white flower her father had sealed there years ago was gone. Ilara stared. "The antidote?" Soren said softly. "Moonthorn, hidden inside your locket all this time." She could not make sense of the words. My father didn't know, perhaps. Or perhaps he did. But the flower saved you. Soren closed the locket gently and laid it in her hand. "Your mother wore healer's silver, Ilara. Not village work, whoever she was, she knew plants. Knew enough to preserve a cure in a child's keepsake." Ilara's fingers shook around the necklace. Then she looked up sharply. "Garrick went for Moonthorn." Soren's silence answered her. Her stomach dropped. "How long?" "He left in the night." She threw back the blankets. The room lurched. Soren caught her before she pitched sideways. "Absolutely not. He went for me. He went because he's the alpha and reckless. He went because he loves me." The healer's mouth pressed flat. Alara was already reaching for the chair where her clothes had been folded. "Where is my bow?" Soren swore under his breath. "You can barely stand." "Then help me stand." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, with the air of a man surrendering to madness, he hauled her upright. Pip's favorite carved wolf sat on the shelf nearby, one leather-bound leg still neatly tied. Ilara caught sight of it and steadied. A camp full of children. Junie's laugh. Brida's scolding. Garrick bent over parchment showing her the shape of letters. Home had crept up on her while she was too busy surviving to notice. And someone had just tried to destroy it. By the time she staggered out into daylight, half the camp was gathered. Brida had her arms folded like crossed axes. Junie's eyes were red from crying. Pip clutched Nessa's hand so tightly the little girl was wincing and not complaining. Mara stood farther back, pale and grim, as if the poison had burned through whatever petty satisfaction she had once treasured. Alara looked at them all. "Who has my bow?" No one spoke. Then Mara stepped forward. She held the bow out in both hands. Ilara stared. Mara did not meet her eyes. I made the string tighter. It had loosened in the damp. It was not an apology. It was the closest thing Mara knew how to make. Ilara took the bow. "Thank you." Mara nodded once and stepped back. Brida pushed a quiver of arrows into Ilara's other hand. "Bring him back," she said roughly. "I intend to." The village square smelled of pitch and fear. Ilara reached it from the ridge above town, belly down in wet grass, her bow laid before her as she peered through the final fringe of trees. They had Garrick strung high enough to humiliate, low enough to torment. Silver chains crossed his chest and wrists. His head hung forward. Blood darkened one shoulder and one side of his temple. His shirt had been half torn away, revealing livid burns where the silver bit into him. He was alive. Barely. Sheriff Vale was giving another speech. Alara could not hear the words over the rush in her ears, but she saw the villagers' faces turned upward, saw Corin near the platform steps, calm and waiting like carrion. A memory flashed sharp through her, Corin's hand on her wrist. You deserve gentleness. Rage steadied her more effectively than medicine ever had. She drew an arrow. The distance was long. Her head still throbbed from the fall, her vision blurred at the edges if she breathed wrong. So she did not breathe wrong. She fixed on the rope above Garrick's bound wrists. Drew. Released. The arrow sliced the rope clean through. For one heartbeat no one understood. Then Garrick dropped. The square erupted. Alara had her second arrow knocked before anyone found the direction of the first. This one she sent into the sheriff's shoulder. He spun with a scream, torch flying from his grip. "Wolf on the ridge!" someone shouted. "No," Ilara whispered, drawing the third arrow. "Not wolf. Human. Forgotten thing. Maid. Orphan. No one ever looked twice until it was too late." Her third arrow took the man nearest Garrick through the thigh. He fell. Garrick hit the platform hard, rolled, and somehow got to one knee despite the chains. "Ilara!" he roared, voice raw with disbelief and fury and something like fear. She was already moving. Down the slope, through the first ring of panicked villagers, past a woman shrieking for her children, past two men fumbling reload crossbows. One lunged at her. She ducked and drove the bow itself into his face. Another grabbed at her skirt. She kicked his knee and heard something crack. Then Garrick was there. Not fully shifted, not fully man, something between. Silver chains still hung from one wrist. Blood ran from half a dozen wounds. His canines had lengthened. His eyes blazed molten gold. He tore a net in half with both hands and threw the weighted silver aside. "Ilara," he said, and even now there was incredulous tenderness in it. "What are you doing?" "Saving your life," she snapped. "Try gratitude." A man rushed them with a spear. Ilara shot him through the arm. Garrick ripped the spear away and flung him into two others. Then Corin shifted. His wolf was pale gray, nearly white, larger than any of the village dogs, but smaller than Garrick in his black form. He lunged from the side, teeth aimed for Garrick's throat. Garrick turned just in time. They collided with a sound like trees splitting. The square vanished into chaos. Villagers fled, screaming. Some kept fighting. The sheriff crawled through the mud, clutching his ruined shoulder. Corin and Garrick tore at one another in the wreckage of the gallows platform, snapping jaws and slashing claws, and old hatred finally bared. "Alara, get back!" Garrick snarled. She ignored him. Corin drove Garrick into the broken beam. Garrick staggered. Corin wheeled for a killing strike. Alara drew her last broadhead arrow. The world narrowed to breath and fur and distance. She loosed. The arrow buried deep in Corin's flank. He howled and twisted sideways, blood spraying the boards. Garrick surged up and slammed into him with enough force to shatter the remaining platform post. Corin hit the mud, rolled and cowered to the end, ran. Straight for the tree line. Garrick lunged after him. Alara caught a fistful of black fur. "No!" The wolf whipped around, huge and terrible, jaws bloody. Her hand trembled in his ruff. "Not now," she said, breathing hard. "He wants you chasing him." For a moment, his golden eyes were all beast. Then recognition settled back in. His ears flattened. He lowered himself. Ilara stared, Around them, the last villagers were fleeing. Sheriff Vale had vanished. The square burned at one corner where the dropped torch had caught hay. Someone shouted for water. A church bell began clanging wildly. Garrick crouched lower. "No," Ilara said. His great head turned just enough to fix one eye on her. "You said humans weren't allowed to ride wolves." The black wolf made a low, impatient sound. Even exhausted, even bleeding, it sounded suspiciously like irritation. Ilara's mouth almost lifted. "You're breaking your own rule, Alpha." He huffed again. Behind them, smoke thickened. Before them, the road to the forest lay open. Ilara slung the bow across her back and climbed onto him. His fur was warm and dense under her hands. His shoulders rolled like moving stone beneath her. Then Garrick ran. They tore across the fields and into the pines with the speed of storm water. Wind ripped tears from Ilara's eyes. She bent low against his neck, fingers buried deep in black fur. The taste of smoke and blood and wild freedom sharp on her tongue. No horse on earth could have carried her like that. No road could have felt so much like coming home. When the camp finally appeared between the trees, wolves poured out to meet them, children, hunters. Brita with her knife still in one hand as though she'd intended to march alone if she had to. Junie crying openly now. Mara pale as bone beside the gate. Pip shouting something triumphantly incoherent. Garrick slowed only once they reached the heart of the clearing. He shifted back, half stumbling, human again, and would have hit the ground if Brita and Soren had not caught him. Ilara slid from his back on shaking legs. For one awful second, she thought Garrick might collapse unconscious before saying anything. Instead, he reached for her. Blood smeared his mouth when he smiled. "Against the rules," he murmured. Ilara laughed through tears. "You made the rule, and I broke it. Good." His hand cupped the back of her neck. All around them, the camp stood silent, watching, waiting. Corin was gone. Alive, still dangerous, everyone knew it. But Garrick looked only at Ilara. "You came for me." She touched the scar on his cheek with trembling fingers. "You came for me first." He kissed her there in the center of camp, bruised and bloody, and in full view of everyone who had once feared her. This time no one looked away, because she was no longer merely the human girl who had stumbled into Wolflands by accident. She was the one who had taught cubs stories, who had mended broken toys, who had learned letters by firelight and brought their alpha home alive from a human noose. She belonged to the story of the camp now, whether any of them had meant for it to happen or not. And as Garrick's forehead rested against hers, and the wolves closed ranks around them like a wall of fur and fire and family, Ilara understood one final truth. The night she crossed into the black fir woods, she had thought monsters were waiting. She had been right, but monsters, she had learned, were not always the creatures with fangs. Sometimes they wore village coats and smiled under church bells. And sometimes the beasts in the forest were the only ones who knew how to love.